So, first, if you could introduce yourself, what is your name and where in the world do you call home right now?
Yeah, so hello, my name is Jake Meyers. I live in Washington, D.C., and I currently work with FEMA.
Great. And so, can you describe your current role just a little bit? Tell us what you do.
So I joined working with FEMA in the middle of COVID last year following grad school. I graduated in 2020. I work in a program called the Continuous Improvement Program. So it's a program that was started after Hurricane Katrina happened. There was an initiative to kind of reform and get better data to inform the way we do disaster operations. And so my job is to go in after a disaster and evaluate different materials and talk to different people and get the story of what worked well and what doesn't. And I write it in a report, and then that report gets elevated to leadership, who can then make better decisions and respond to disasters in the future. And most recently, I had the chance to go to Louisiana. There, I got to learn about how we adapted hurricane response efforts in a COVID environment. And I work with all kinds of different aspects of disaster management. But at the end of the day, my job is to talk to people, use their voice, use different like ethnographic and applied social science techniques to capture the meat and potatoes of what works well and what doesn't.
Hmm. And what inspired you to pursue that specific job or kind of environmental storytelling more broadly?
Yeah, I guess I became interested in storytelling back in undergrad. I got a chance to travel the world a lot and do different research projects, being embedded with community members. And whenever you're abroad for the first time, you have friends and family back home asking how are things. And I think a lot of us will choose to use social media like Facebook or Instagram to share our experiences with others. But I realize that the way people are sharing stories on social media is not really rich. It just it's point and shoot photography. Here's a picture, and of course you'll understand what I experienced because here's a picture of it. But it's missing a lot of context. So I try to reframe the way I engage folks with social media and use it as an opportunity to use my social media platform as, I don't have a lot of followers or whatever, but to use my platform as a way to tell stories of people I meet and to use that as an opportunity for cross-cultural exchange. And I carried that message through with I did the Peace Corps, and Peace Corps has three goals. One of which is different providing technical assistance in different development areas, but the other two goals are to do cross-cultural exchange, share the culture of America with people abroad, and then share those people's host country nationals cultures with Americans. And for me, the best way to do that was through the use of stories. So I got practice doing different storytelling techniques when I was in the Peace Corps. And I was able to kind of leverage my Peace Corps experience into a Fulbright in Cambodia, where I got to kind of investigate what went well and what didn't following a giant wildfire event in the Tonle Sap Lake area. And when I was doing this, my job was to go out and interview community members and find out what happened and what their ideas were for possible solutions. And I got to elevate their voices in the form of different report writings that were used by Ministry of Environment officials who ultimately make the decisions of how different conservation resources are used. So when I was doing that, I thought I need to go to grad school and learn how to do this better. I want to have social science methodologies and concepts that I can use in the real world. And applying for jobs last year, this role that I found with FEMA really tied together all my interest in building resiliency to climate change, how to use storytelling as a tool to make things better. And I view stories as pieces of data, and we need better stories to make better decisions. And if we want to do transformational change, I believe storytelling is the biggest aspect of that, because the past we tried to solve problems with the use of technical experts, and we like to render things technical. So take climate change for an issue. We like to say that if we just use plastic straws or reduce our carbon emissions on airplanes and cars, we'll solve it just like that. But that's not the issue. I think we need to rethink the issue of climate change is not as a problem to be solved, but a process to be engaged with. So to do that, we need to go out and listen to different voices and understand different aspects of how one person in Texas raising cattle, another person in Kenya trying to, there's all these different aspects of climate change that affect everybody differently. And to get those stories, we need to capture all these different stories, elevate people's voices, and let the decision makers know that this is the reality on the ground. And if they can do that, they're better informed and they can make better decisions. And then ultimately, we can move the needle and try to incite transformational change on these issues. So yeah.
Hmm. So you mentioned Kenya. I know you've actually done some work there. Can you take me back to what you were doing on the ground, what it looked like, what you saw?
Yeah, so I had a chance to do some research with a few different groups in Kenya through grad school. One of which was with a professor who's trying to study rural to urban migration. In Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, population is growing, and people like to think, who don't know the continent very well, that everybody's in a rural community. But the fact is, I think more than 50% of people now on the continent actually live in an urban area. But what's getting missed in the process, where academics and NGOs and what like are ignoring, are these peri-urban areas. So these like suburban areas, these towns in the periphery of major metropolitan areas. And these areas have major food security concerns. A lot of these people are from smaller towns from the past who used to be farmers. And for one reason or another, whether it be climate change or large scale farming pushing smaller farmers out of business, people are moving. And yeah, they're not climate refugees, because I think technically you have to leave your country's border to be considered a refugee by the UN. I might be wrong on that. But they're internally displaced. And where are they going? They're going to cities. And so my research team, we did a 1,000 household survey, and we investigate what are the barriers to producing food, because that's their traditional livelihood. That's the way they get income. And so we identified different barriers that are preventing people in these peri-urban areas what to do. And on the side, I really was interested in trying to complement the research we were doing with storytelling. So my thought process, my perspective, I'm a little more critical of academia, because the team that I was with, we did a great job engaging stakeholders, getting a diverse set of voices, understanding what the realities on the ground are. But at the end of the day, we take that information, we put it in a peer-reviewed journal, and it gets shared and widely dispersed across academic circles, largely in the Western world, in the US and Europe. But that information doesn't come back down to the people who need it most, the decision makers. We interviewed local politicians and government heads. We can share that PDF file that's 15 pages with all these complex visualizations and graphics and p-values and whatnot, but that doesn't really change the way they view and understand the issue to the point where they can actually take action on this information. So what I wanted to do on the side of my research there was engage in storytelling. And I find that, these people don't want to read, decision makers, politicians, they don't want to read 30-page reports. I mean, the UN is great at writing 100-page reports on this or that. When you're a politician, you don't have this unlimited bandwidth to read all these resources. So what do they watch? Well, I think people consume media, and especially in sub-Saharan Africa, a lot of people are very prolific on WhatsApp, very prolific on Facebook. So I was thinking about ways in which you can capture stories as forms of data to be widely disseminated. And so I had a chance to interview a farmer, and I got his story about how he uses urban farming in Nairobi to kind of feed his community, convert green space into areas that can help fight climate change. And ultimately, I produced this 1 minute and 30 video that was shared across different research institutes. It had the chance to be aired at a UN Habitat conference in Kenya, and decision makers saw it. I don't know if they acted on it, but it's just a type of storytelling that I think is important. You look at different organizations like the World Food Program or Nat Geo, and they talk about making stories for an audience of one. So how do you create media products that target the people who have the most say in the issue? And they're people that are ultimately more captivated by stories than they are, facts or like data, like hard, raw numbers. And so if you can tell a story in a particular formula, and the formula that I like to use is identifying compelling characters, overcoming obstacles to achieve scalable solutions. A lot of stories follow that format. And so what I like to do, my story was find a compelling character, have him talk directly to the camera, leave my voice out of it. Talk about the obstacles that he's facing and what's his solution and how is that solution scalable, because people want to listen to a story and see I can do that too, or like I can help empower this process as well. So I think that, and I had a chance to enter that story into a storytelling competition and won that, not because of my technical ability to produce a story, but it was because it follows this format. Again, compelling characters overcoming obstacles to achieve solutions. So I really find that if we can do a better job, whether we're a researcher, a practitioner, whatever role you're in, whatever industry you're in, I think that we need to understand the storytelling process better. I read this great book. One of my undergraduate professors wrote a book called The Storytelling Animal, How Stories Make Us Human. And he describes like story is to human as fish is to water, or water is to fish. And so this is like a fundamental form of communication. That's how we absorb information from the dawn of time. And now we kind of, these technical experts in fields like climate change really fixate on these graphics. But when you think of climate change, who are some people you think of? You don't know, climate scientists aren't household names, but people like Al Gore are. And why is that? Well, he kind of has this really nice talent of weaving emotional, compelling stories and pairing it with those like hockey stick carbon emissions graphs in a way that gets people to care and move on the issue. And so my challenge, or what I'm passionate about, is trying to find opportunities to incorporate storytelling into work. I mean, storytelling can be something as important as getting people to raise money. I listened to the World Food Program president talk about the story, how he can tell people that, I think the fact was like the figure was 65 million people go to bed hungry every day, but he decided to, at a little like donor fundraising party, decided to tell the story about one mother in a UN refugee camp in Lebanon who struggles every day, who can't go to sleep because the pain of her stomach keeps her up all night, and is running out of space on her belt to put notches in. And he did it in a very compelling, captivating way. And he found from that experience that donations skyrocketed. So this is a technique and a tool that is used to not just understand the cause. Storytelling isn't the reason to understand the cause of why a problem is. It can help identify solutions. It can break down barriers. It can, increase your ability to fundraise and people to care about an issue that they normally wouldn't. And it's also a great way to report on things. It's a way to measure impact. And I think we're not really good at telling the story about the impact of people's work. And so that's a big skill that people are looking for in program evaluation, how to tell the story of the work you're doing. Or when you do a project that's very complex, people are investing time and resources into it. How do you make sure that you tell the story in a way that communicates the impact, so that we say, hey, we should keep doing this, we should scale this up, this is a solution that needs to be replicated. So yeah, that's a long about way to answer your question, but that's kind of that's what drives my work and my interest.
Mm. And who do you think should be telling these stories? Is it the job of people working for the UN? Is it the people on the ground? Is there a kind of collaboration between those two that you think is the best way to be doing things?
Well, there's like different fields of thought. There are some groups who like to do projects called participatory voices, or like videos, where there's this emerging trend by social scientists where they say, instead of me going out as an anthropologist and trying to understand this problem and understand through my lens and my perspective, I'm going to give a camera to the community that's impacted. They're going to go out and they're going to document what they see. I'll tell them the script of, hey, I want you to understand this problem of irrigation or climate change and farming, but go out and photograph what you see. And then researchers can take that and use it as a form of voice. Because sometimes I think there's a problem of journalists or social scientists coming in with their own biases, and they're looking to confirm whatever their agenda is or whatever narrative they're seeking to write about. And I'll take climate migration as an example. A lot of times you'll see articles from journalists who go in and say, I want to write a story about how climate change is causing people to migrate. And they'll go out to a community and they'll say, is climate change causing you to leave your farm? People will say yes, but like, it's a problem because that might not be the top reason. It's definitely a factor, but if you ask, somebody their top 3 reasons as to why they left their farm, they'll cite different reasons of political unrest or whatever. And that's not to downplay the issue of climate change, but it's being a little bit disingenuous. And I feel like this is critique that I'm channeling from some of my professors I learned from at University of Arizona. And that's not necessarily opinion I adopt either. But the point is that like there's a lot of problems in the ways in which outsiders try to understand people's problems and communicate them to other groups, whether it be in a report or a journal or an article. And I think we need to really focus and emphasize on the people that are being impacted themselves. And so I view my role as just like a connector, like a way to, like a platform. Maybe I can come in and use whatever resources I have from my organization or my social media platform, whatever, to elevate those voices in a way that they can speak directly to decision makers. Because I feel like if we look at political issues, I mean, the biggest critiques really are that politicians don't get it. And why is it that? Because they don't understand this, they don't have access to, or they don't want to listen to the stories on the ground. And so we all need to think about ways in which we are captivating, compelling stories that get the people who ultimately make decisions to understand that reality. And then if they understand that reality, you do a good job of communicating that, then I don't think they can ignore those realities on the ground. So I don't know if that answers your question fully, but yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. And I know you've done this issue has presented itself in your work in Cambodia, and I was hoping you could tell me a little bit about what you were seeing there and how this issue of environmental storytelling manifested.
Yeah, so I had a chance to study abroad in Cambodia as an undergrad, and I had these deep-rooted connections with communities that reside in floating villages. And it's a really interesting habitat ecosystem where it's a flooded forest. The Tonle Sap Lake is one of the largest inland lakes in Southeast Asia. It's a really critical, important source for about a million livelihoods. A million people's economic livelihoods depend on this lake. And it provides about 75% of the protein required for Cambodians' diets. And the water is actually tied to the Himalayan mountains. So in the Himalayan mountains, the snow melts and the Mekong River gets so strong that it actually will change the direction of another river, the Tonle Sap River, pushes that water upstream, and the Tonle Sap Lake will expand 2 to 5 times bigger in the wet season than the dry season. So in the wet season, people can go out and go fishing right from their homes on a floated village. And then in the dry season, they resort to more aquaculture or farming initiatives. But in 2016, it was an El Nino year, record-breaking temperatures happened, and the flooded forest caught on fire. That's something that you don't think of. When you see trees that are half underwater, you don't think that this could ever catch on fire. And it's not, and fire is not a natural part of those ecosystems. So I was monitoring this in 2016 from afar, and I saw that this very precious ecosystem, and it's a place too that is a biosphere, UNESCO biosphere reserve, where there's like 10,000 critically endangered water bird species. So much diversity, like I think 300 plus species reside in these flooded forested ecosystems. Incredible, like different primates, very special places that tourists will spend thousands of dollars to come out and see that for themselves. But nobody really asked the question why this fire happened and what could be done. Like I was kind of shocked. Some like local media coverage in Cambodia, but this wasn't an international issue that people were looking about. I mean, for context, a third of the flooded forest ecosystem on the Tonle Sap burned. That's 250,000 hectares that were lost in 1 year to a fire. You could see this from space, but yet no one is doing anything about it. So I thought, how can I wanted to do a Fulbright. So I kind of like went out and said, I found an NGO, the Wildlife Conservation Society. And I was like, hey, I know this area is in your jurisdiction. I kind of want to go in and like understand the root causes of the problem and try to like identify solutions to it by working with different community members. So I drafted a research plan and I went out there and I just spent my time kind of embedded for 10 months with the community, interviewing them using participatory rural appraisal tools. So like very specific questions that get to the root cause. And it really tries to like get at your, the respondent's voice, what they think is the reason why that fire happened and their solutions. And so in this process, I learned that by talking with community members in this unique kind of social science way, that I identified different causes of the fire that weren't previously known to decision makers at the ministry level and the NGO level. They're outsiders, they're technical experts, but they never really went in and asked the community what happened, what could you do differently next time, and possible solutions. And so through my work, I was able to identify different behaviors and identify opportunities for behavior change. And I tried to like package that information in a storytelling way. So I hired an artist to go out and paint like an infographic and adopt like the Smokey the Bear kind of a material that we use very successfully. It's like the original success story of using like a compelling character to share an obstacle about a solution. So I try to mimic that. And the result of all my time and all of this was that it changed the perspective of decision makers. I was able to like be this middleman of sorts to elevate voices that I was talking to kind of in a way through me speak to the decision makers. And so I wasn't, I try to avoid using my perspective and voice because I'm not a fire management expert. I'm not an expert really in anything. I'm kind of just a multidisciplinary guy. But I viewed it as an opportunity to raise people's voices through the act of storytelling to try to see if they can make a difference, like if the community members themselves can make a difference, because some of their thoughts was like, no one ever asked me, like, are you like, you're gonna like tell people what I told you to the government? Like, wow, like they feel so disenfranchised. And so I feel like academia's role or NGOs or different governmental groups need to really value community perspective, because ultimately through my work, I was able to highlight that the community did have something to offer. And in the past, they're left out of the decision-making process. So I feel like anybody can try to capture that information through ethnography, but I think storytelling is a really powerful tool in terms of how do you package that information in a way that will capture the interest of decision makers. And I can tell an example of one weird story is that like the lake is drying up, and I talked to one fisherman who said that he can't find any fish anymore, and that honey harvesting is a growing trend out there. And he said that he doesn't know how to do any honey harvesting, so he just over time discovered that he'll take a can of like a mosquito repellent and just like nuke the beehive. And he used to actually, he used to use fire to burn down beehives to capture the honey and harvest that, and that was causing fires. And then he was so scared of causing a fire, but he still depends on honey. So he would go out and use mosquito repellent to nuke the to nuke the beehive to capture the honey. And he was doing this in a way that he thought was preventing the risk of fire. But what that showed was that, hey, honey harvesting is an income generating activity. And maybe there's an opportunity for different NGOs and government initiatives to come in and train people how to do honey harvesting so that A, they can earn income, and B, it can reduce the risk of wildfires. So that was something that was totally off the radar of decision makers. And this is one example of a possible solution, an opportunity to change people's behaviors in a way that's culturally sensitive and environmentally friendly.
So through that listening and storytelling process, not only were you figuring out some of the reasons for this fire, but you were also identifying like what are these alternatives and how, and I imagine that plays into the decision for people like these fisher folk of whether they're going to move to another place or not, like whether displacement happens or if they're able to adapt and stay in place, which is kind of an urgent question for people and communities around the world.
Yeah, there definitely is an urgent crisis in that particular community of people being forced out of the community because they can no longer fish. The risk of climate change, upstream dam development is just going to create a crisis. I don't know if this ecosystem is going to make it past 2030, 2040, 2050, depending on how China is engaging other countries upstream with hydropower development. Couple that with climate change, couple that with people also in surrounding areas moving towards the lake and now chopping down trees in the forest to produce rice paddies so that they themselves can have an income. But you also really need to look at this kind of issue from an historical context and understand and place why people are doing the things they are in history. Cambodia has a very troubled history of genocide. At one point, everybody in the whole country lost their land. There's no land titles. Everybody was moved around. It was such a devastating event from the Khmer Rouge. And so you need to be very sensitive in telling people where they can or can't live, because a lot of them live through a tragedy you can't possibly understand. But I guess ultimately too, going back to your question, we like to think that technical experts have all the answers, and we need to really ask better questions. And asking questions in a way that a journalist does, I think, is a useful tool for maybe what a scientist can do. And asking those questions, you can reconceptualize the issue at hand and then potentially propose solutions that you never thought were possible, but through the power of asking questions.
Yeah, how do you envision kind of the intensifying level and the complexity of climate change changing the types of questions we should be asking?
I'll take an example. I had a chance to work with a research institute in Kenya called the International Livestock Research Institute. So this is like a campus where their goal is to help East African governments report on greenhouse gas emissions to the government in accordance with the UN Climate Accord. And what I thought was interesting is that, yeah, that's a very technical field. You can get a climate scientist respond to that issue. But I was so surprised because I joined this team and there was like 30 team members, and they all came from different disciplines. There was a gender scientist, a soil scientist, like people looking at the economy, a veterinarian, like all these different people from different perspectives were coming together to try and address an issue that I think traditionally was only being addressed by one or two technical areas. I think we used to think of climate change as an issue for engineers and scientists to solve. Now we're including social scientists, and we're looking at it through the lens of social justice. And so I think we need to further continue multidisciplinary approaches to find solutions to climate change, because if you might solve one problem technically by reducing carbon emissions or adapting to climate change, but you might create another if you don't approach the issue through holistic processes. And to do that, you need to have people who can dabble in different disciplines and understand different areas. And that really, the most important part, I think, is making sure you know who your stakeholders are and making sure you understand what their needs are. And to do that, you need to listen, you need to go in and embed yourself. And the more time you can spend in that process, the better results you have. A lot of projects, especially international projects, will go in with technical experts. They'll go in for a week or two, think that they understand the issue, go back and channel all these resources to solve the problem, but they didn't really capture what the community that we're telling them. And so, I mean, like, time is a luxury, and not everybody can spend more time with different stakeholders. But the more time you can, the better. But if you can't spend time, then you really need to pay particular attention in terms of what questions you're asking, how you're listening, and how you can respond, or what resources that you can then yourself provide.
Hmm. And how do you think governments, NGOs, and then kind of lay people globally can best support or participate in this kind of social justice informed storytelling about climate change and climate related displacement?
I think part of it is the need to create like better knowledge networks. So what I mean by that is that maybe one group or one part of the government is really good on one issue and they capture a story, but they're not sharing it. And like we have to, like, I feel like everybody's in their own little silo.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody's reinventing the wheel. It's what I see with my current role. We need to do better jobs, a better job of collaborating, and then engaging in the storytelling process in a very smart way, but also it's not enough to just capture that story. You need to share it effectively. And I think these are wicked problems that require wicked solutions. And to do that, you need everybody at the table. And so it's kind of like the race for, like, breast cancer research and the cure. Like, it's a bit very privatized, and everybody's making profit. You don't want to share things. But with COVID-19 vaccine, everybody's sharing information in a very way that really solved the problem a lot faster than we ever could. So I think we can share the problem in that kind of spirit and be very collaborative and not treat it as like intellectual property, if that makes sense. We really need to be more, I think, forthcoming with how we share knowledge, disseminate knowledge, and try not to be competitive. I mean, even nonprofits are competitive for funding, and they want to be the experts in this, and they don't want to share necessarily solutions with others. And I think, I don't know how you change that, but I think just acknowledging that problem is the first step.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. What an informative conversation. And I wish you all the best of luck with your environmental storytelling pursuits.
Great, thank you very much.
Thanks.